1. The betrayal. It started with a lie, not a bold-faced deception, but the kind that slithers into the quiet spaces of a troubled marriage, feeding off doubt and loneliness. The husband had convinced himself it was harmless, at first. A lingering glance, an innocent touch, words exchanged in whispers when no one else was listening. It wasn't with a stranger. That would have been easier to forgive, perhaps. Instead, it was her, his wife's sister, the woman who had been a fixture in their home, who had shared childhood secrets with his wife and stood beside her on their wedding day. The betrayal was not just in the act itself, but in the deep and familiar intimacy of it. It was personal in a way that made it impossible to undo. The affair was brief but devastating. A stolen moment here, a reckless night there. It was never love, only an escape, a desperate grasp for something neither of them could fully name. And when the truth came out, as such things always do, it did not do so quietly. It exploded, tearing through the fabric of their lives with merciless force. His wife discovered the truth in the cruelest way possible, not through confession, but by accident, a forgotten text, an overheard phone call, a sudden shift in the air that made her pause, long enough to notice the small betrayals she had ignored before. And when she confronted him, there was no room for denial. His silence was an admission, his guilt laid bare in the space between them. The marriage collapsed under the weight of the betrayal, shattering into something unrecognizable. Resentment settled in like an unwanted guest, poisoning every attempt at closure. Love, once so certain, curdled into something ugly and sharp-edged. But the wounds extended beyond husband and wife. The sisters, once inseparable, became strangers overnight. The bond they had spent a lifetime building was now fractured beyond repair, splintered into jagged pieces that cut deep. There was no apology strong enough to mend what had been broken. No explanation that could erase the pain of knowing the person you trusted most had become your greatest enemy. And then, there was him, the man who had destroyed not just a marriage, but a family, the ultimate traitor. He did not fight to stay, nor did he beg for forgiveness. He vanished, slipping out of their lives as if he had never been there at all. Maybe he thought leaving would lessen the damage, that his absence would allow them to heal. But some betrayals don't fade with time. Some wounds never close. And in the hollow space he left behind, the damage remained, a scar that neither sister could ever ignore. 2 years later, desperation and a reckoning. Time had moved forward, indifferent to the wreckage left behind. The years did not erase the past, only dulled its sharpest edges, leaving behind a dull ache where once there was fire. The wife, no, the ex-wife, had learned to live with the weight of betrayal, though it never truly lifted. She had tried to rebuild, to piece together a life from the fragments of what was left, but some things could not be salvaged. Now she stood on the precipice of disaster, staring down at the unraveling thread of her existence. The family home, the last relic of the life she had once known, was slipping from her grasp. The bank notices had turned from warnings to final demands, each one a tightening noose around her throat. She had fought, taken extra work where she could, swallowed her pride in ways she never imagined. But it wasn't enough. Soon, she would have nothing. And so, with nowhere else to turn, she did the one thing she had sworn she never would. She reached out to him. Her fingers hovered over the screen for what felt like an eternity before she finally pressed call. She wasn't sure what she expected, to be ignored, ridiculed, or met with cold indifference. But he answered. Not immediately, but soon enough that it was clear he had seen her name and chosen to pick up. His voice was the same, smooth and controlled, as if the years had never passed. There was no hesitation in his tone, no bitterness. If anything, he sounded amused. He listened to her speak, let her explain, though she knew he already understood. He had likely seen it coming long before she ever admitted it to herself. He was doing well, better than well. He had built a life for himself, one of comfort, stability, and most of all, power. The kind of power that could make problems disappear, the kind of power that could save her home with a single stroke of his pen. But power never came without a price. She knew before he even said it that he would not do it out of kindness. There was something else in his voice, something dangerous and knowing. He still harbored something for her, not love, but desire, twisted and sharpened by years of separation, and not just for her, for both of them. Her stomach clenched as the meaning settled in, an unspoken proposition curling between them like smoke. It was absurd, impossible. And yet, she did not hang up. The thought had existed before, buried deep, unspoken, unacknowledged. A dark curiosity she had always been too afraid to name. Even in their worst moments, he had possessed a magnetism, a pull that defied reason. It was what had drawn her to him in the first place. It was what had destroyed her in the end. And her sister, her estranged, bitter, equally ruined sister, what would she say? Would she recoil in disgust, or would she recognize the same desperation? The unthinkable took shape between them, a deal made in the shadows of their past. If she wanted his help, if she wanted salvation, she would have to share him. It was a reckoning long overdue. The arrangement. The rules were simple, or so they thought. 1. Emotional detachment. This was a transaction, nothing more. No nostalgia, no whispered promises in the dark. 2. Boundaries. No jealousy, no illusions of love. This wasn't about rebuilding what was lost. It was about survival. 3. Mutual benefit. He would provide financial relief, and in return, they would give him what he had always wanted. Both of them, together. But rules were made for breaking. At first, it was mechanical, a means to an end. The wife approached it with the same cold pragmatism that had carried her through years of silent suffering. This was just another sacrifice, another compromise, like so many others she had made. She buried her pride beneath the weight of necessity, reminding herself that desperation was an ugly but powerful motivator. The sister, long branded as the betrayer, had her own reasons. Maybe it was guilt, the endless burden of knowing she had been the catalyst for their destruction. Maybe it was defiance, a way of proving that she wasn't the villain they had painted her to be. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something far more dangerous. And then there was him, the man who had once torn them apart, now binding them together in the most twisted way imaginable. For years, he had been the architect of their suffering, but now he was caught in a delicate balance, one that teetered between power and peril. He had won, hadn't he? He had finally turned his long-buried fantasy into reality. But fantasies rarely account for the weight of real emotion. At first, it was easy. Cold, calculated, structured. They treated it like an agreement, each playing their part, each keeping their distance where it mattered most. They thought they could compartmentalize the past, suppress the history that lurked beneath every touch, every glance. But wounds don't heal when you keep reopening them. For the wife, resentment festered beneath the surface, but so did something else. She had spent years hating him, blaming him for everything that had gone wrong, but now, confronted with his presence once more, the past felt less like a wound and more like an unfinished story. Anger and attraction blurred until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The sister, so desperate for validation, found herself unraveling in ways she hadn't expected. She had always been the reckless one, the selfish one. But what if this wasn't just about him? What if it was about them, her and her sister? The bond they had lost, the connection she longed to restore. She had never cared about redemption before, but now she wanted to prove that she was more than the sum of her mistakes. And the husband? He had thought himself in control, the master of the game. But the reality was different. This wasn't just indulgence anymore. The lines he had so carefully drawn began to blur, his desires tangling with something deeper, something he hadn't prepared for. The power he had once wielded so easily now felt precarious, slipping through his fingers each time they looked at him with something more than obligation. Because power is only power when it is unchallenged. And in the quiet spaces between their agreement, between resentment and longing, between pain and desire, something else was taking shape, something none of them could control. Fourth, consequences and chaos. It didn't take long for things to unravel. They had tried to keep it simple, to convince themselves they could move like ghosts through the wreckage of their past without being haunted by it. But ghosts have a way of making themselves known. Emotional complications. Despite their best efforts, emotions resurfaced. Jealousy, longing, regret, all the things they had sworn to leave buried. For the wife, detachment had seemed easy in theory. She had told herself this was survival, nothing more. But was it? The more she played her part, the more she questioned what her part even was. Had she reclaimed her agency? Turned the tables on the man who had once controlled her? Or was she simply walking back into the same trap, one dressed up in the illusion of choice? And what did it mean when she found herself wanting him, not just tolerating him, but wanting him? The sister had entered the arrangement with her own set of justifications. She had told herself this was a way to atone, to prove she wasn't the villain of this story. But now, she wasn't so sure. If this was about redemption, why did it feel so much like temptation? Had she truly changed? Or was she just repeating the same mistakes, dressed in different circumstances? The past was supposed to stay in the past. Instead, it was breathing down their necks, whispering in the silences between their arguments, wrapping itself around every touch, every glance, every unspoken question. Family dynamics. The arrangement was supposed to be a transaction. But transactions have receipts, and this one demanded payment in ways none of them had anticipated. At first, the sisters had tiptoed around their shared discomfort, trying to convince themselves that this was an act of sacrifice, an offering made in the name of survival. But as time passed, the foundation beneath them began to crack. Was this loyalty? A desperate attempt to reclaim what they had lost? Or was it something darker, something more primal? The tension between them grew heavier with each passing day. Some nights, they found echoes of their old bond, fragile and fleeting. Other nights, resentment twisted between them like a living thing, poisoning every interaction. Were they saving each other, or were they complicit in their own undoing? The past had already torn them apart once. Now, the present was daring them to do it again. Power and control. Then there was him. The husband had always believed he was the one in control, the puppet master pulling the strings. He had set the terms, dictated the rules. This was his fantasy realized. Two women, two halves of the same story, now bound to him in a way that defied logic. But power has a way of shifting. He had expected them to remain passive, to exist for him. Instead, they were changing, evolving. The wife, once broken by betrayal, was no longer the fragile woman he had left behind. She had tasted power, even if it came in the form of something twisted. And the sister, his former accomplice, his first mistake, had learned from the past. She was no longer content to be the reckless, impulsive pawn in his game. And now, he was the one caught in the web. Who was really in control? The wife who had initiated the arrangement to save her home? The sister who sought to rewrite her role in their shared history? Or the husband who had once been the architect of their destruction but now found himself at the mercy of the very chaos he had created? Lines blurred, loyalties shifted, and in the wreckage of it all, one question loomed over them like a storm on the horizon. How long before it all came crashing down? V. The final choice. There was no clear path forward, no easy resolution. The arrangement had fulfilled its purpose: financial stability, security, survival. But at what cost? What had started as a transaction had become something unrecognizable, something tangled in longing, regret, and the ghosts of what once was. They had all played their roles. The wife, determined and resolute, had bargained away her pride to save what was hers. The sister, seeking redemption, had waded into dangerous waters, hoping to rewrite her place in their shared history. And the husband, the man who had once shattered them both, had orchestrated it all, only to find himself ensnared in the very chaos he had created. But now the deal was over, and what remained was a question none of them could ignore. Was this just an agreement, or had they rewritten their fate in ways none of them had expected? For the wife, the answer was the heaviest of all. She had spent years hating him, resenting the way he had torn her world apart. And yet, here she was, standing at a crossroads where leaving meant acknowledging that she had been complicit in something she never thought she'd accept, that she had allowed herself to feel something again, even if she refused to name it. She had three choices. 1. Stay. Accept this new, twisted reality. Keep the man who had betrayed her, but on her terms. It wouldn't be love, not in the way it once was. But maybe love had never been the right word for what they had. Maybe this was something else entirely: power, possession, mutual destruction in its most intoxicating form. Could she live with that? 2. Walk away. Take the money, take the security, and disappear. Start over with the knowledge that she had done what she had to do. But what kind of woman did that make her? Could she look at herself in the mirror and still recognize who she was before all of this? 3. Undo it all. Reject the deal. Reject him. Reject the woman she had become. Could she go back to who she was before the first betrayal? Or had she already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? The answer lay somewhere in the ashes of their shared past, waiting to be uncovered. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again.